Authoress by Oleanderhoney. Chapter 10. In Any Capacity. Summary. It's a late night, and for once, the British government has nothing to do. Mycroft Holmes flicks on the small monitor and reclines back in his office chair, with a tumbler of scotch resting on his knee. The Davos reports were wrapping up nicely, and his phone conference with the Chinese Prime Minister was postponed until further notice. So, for the first time in what felt like a long while, he found himself with nothing to do. It was time to see what his little brother was up to. After all, someone needed to test the new model surveillance cameras MI5 recently came out with. He watches the screen as Sherlock sways with the music of his violin. From the way the man threads himself through the phrases of the piece, Mycroft can tell it's something of Debussy's. Sherlock always did have a fondness for that particular composer, and Mycroft wishes he could hear it. The audio was off. He'd have to make a note for IT. He wonders where Jane Watson is for a moment before he glances at the clock and realizes it is quite late. She must be asleep, then. Which was a shame, really, seeing as how she was just as interesting as Sherlock to watch. She was a novel concept. Someone so ordinary on the outside, and yet so full of surprises. She was a contradiction, like Sherlock said. With one hand, she can heal the sick, and the other, she can shoot a man between the eyes from over 500 yards. He's read her dossier. She could have made it as a sniper, a good one too, but chose instead to tend to the wounded. The combination made for someone both very compassionate and very lethal. And there's also the no-nonsense way she handles his brother, which always makes for a good laugh. He's not wrong often, but for once he's glad he was about Jane. Dare say it. She was even good for him, albeit in some weird, backwards way. Ah, well, it seemed like nothing particularly interesting was going on tonight, and he goes to switch off the monitor. He pauses when he sees Sherlock suddenly stop, his bow mid-stroke for a moment before starting up again. He plays for a bit before stopping again, and this time he actually lowers the violin and faces the rest of the sitting room. His gaze lingers on the hall just outside. Mycroft zooms in. He watches as his brother cocks his head to the side, as if listening intently for something. Sherlock gives a little start, and he makes an abortive movement forward before he stops himself. Mycroft leans forward in his chair when Sherlock closes his eyes, and his lips begin to move. Upon further inspection, Mycroft can just make out that he appears to be counting. But counting for what? When Sherlock reaches about 30, his eyes fly open, and he all but tosses the violin on the chair before rushing to the doorway. He pauses, leaning against the jamb, for a second, before whirling around, his dressing gown flaring out around him. He hurries off in the direction of the kitchen for a moment, and out of sight of the camera. Alarmed, Mycroft leans back in his chair and fumbles for his mobile. Something had Sherlock spooked, and his sudden sentinel-like behavior spells trouble. Mycroft is just about through with a text, sending one of his men over to Baker Street to check for possible intruders, when Sherlock comes back into view. He looks more agitated than before, and clutched tightly in his hand is not a weapon, but a glass of water. What? What's even more bewildering is the fact that now Sherlock is pacing, lips moving as he talks to himself all the while. Every now and then he stops and holds the water out in front of him, and then shakes his head in frustration before starting the whole thing again. Suddenly, Sherlock stops one last time and turns sharply in the direction of whatever noise caught his attention. A split second later, he flies out of the sitting room and into the hall. Mycroft just manages to see the tails of his robe whipping behind him as he bounds up the stairs to Jane's room. Jane's room? What was he? Ah, yes. Jane must be having a nightmare, which was odd. Well, it wasn't odd for her to be having night terrors, no. In fact, it was warranted given the PTSD and the former therapist. What was odd was the fact that Sherlock was perturbed by the matter. No, not only perturbed, anxious, flustered, worried, concerned. For her, if the water was anything to go by. And the pacing? Mycroft is yet again surprised, and he leans back in his chair. He brings his hands prayer-like up against his lips as he contemplates the now empty sitting room. This was truly unprecedented. Jane has once again wormed her way into his brother's life, and has all but dug her hooks in. Yes, he admitted there was some sort of allure at the beginning. She was a walking contradiction, and Sherlock always loved a good puzzle. But this? Sentiment. It was uncalled for. Mycroft thinks back to the last time Sherlock cared for anyone other than himself. He will never forget how far his brother fell after his friendship with that Trevor boy ended so tragically. There was a time when Sherlock was hooked up to tubes and IV lines, where Mycroft thought he would never come back to him. It was when he was shaking apart at the seams, during another detox, where Mycroft taught him how to keep himself apart from such things, how to protect himself. And now Sherlock was in jeopardy of making the same mistake all over again, and Mycroft wouldn't let him. He types out the text he knows will set things right. Caring is not an advantage. M. He's just about ready to send the message when Sherlock comes back into the sitting room. Mycroft watches as Sherlock paces, slower this time, a hand rubbing his chin in consternation. He lowers himself slowly onto the sofa and presses his palms together under his chin. It's his conflicted expression that tells Mycroft that Sherlock knows the predicament he's let his heart fall into. He rests easy at the knowledge that he will make the obvious and practical decision and get rid of the problem. Simple, clean. He taught his brother well, after all. The Sherlock on the screen leans forward, his elbows on his knees, and his head in his hands. He looks up, his eyes landing on something familiar on the mantel. Just then, the audio from the hidden camera crackles to life, just in time for Mycroft to hear his brother's worn and resigned sigh. He's made his decision, then. Good. He picks up his scotch. It was good, right? Of course it was. It was a pragmatic solution. Simple, clean, better for everyone involved, surely. Wrong. He snatches up his mobile. Delete, delete, delete. I'm sure there's another way for delete, delete. Don't you think? Delete, delete. You're better with her. Wait. Yes, that's right, isn't it? You are better with her, you know. I wouldn't make any hasty decisions, especially not having slept on it first. Send. There was something about this, about Jane and Sherlock together, that made some sort of sense, and he would be damned to see them torn asunder before he figured out what exactly that something was. Mycroft watches as Sherlock marches up to the bookshelf to the left of the mantel, and yanks out the hidden camera, an expression of fury on his face that is almost comical. Suddenly he gets a screen full of a toilet bowl just before the feed shorts out, and the monitor fills with static. With a chuckle, he shuts it off. Ah, well. He pours another scotch, content his little brother will make the right decision. The end.